Hello, and welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I'm Dan Barker, FFRF's co-president, coming to you live from the Stephen Uhl Friendly Atheist Studio in Freethought Hall. Freethought Hall is the national office of the Freedom from Religion Foundation in Madison, Wisconsin.
FFRF's Director of Governmental Affairs based in Washington, D.C. Today on Ask an Atheist, Christian nationalism's growing security threat. We're going to talk with Wajahat Ali about the growing security threat of Christian nationalism and how it relates to Ginny Thomas's work to promulgate the big lie. We'll also talk about Waj's book, Go Back to Where You Came From, and other helpful recommendations on how to become an American, how writing his book shaped his worldview towards the threat of Christian nationalism. Waj writes for The Daily Beast. He has previously been a New York Times contributing op-ed writer, CNN commentator, host for HuffPost, and co-host of Al Jazeera's America, The Stream. He is the co-host of the Democracy-ish podcast. Recently, he was a featured panelist on Christian nationalism, hosted by one of FFRF's allies, the Interfaith Alliance. And we'll hear more from Interfaith Alliance next week. You can also find Waj on Twitter at Wajahat Ali. Waj does identify as a Muslim and not as a non-believer, but he would also say he's a very fine writer, well-spoken speaker, and a brownish dad. Waj, we're honored to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, you godless heathens and future fodder for hellfire.
We've heard that before. So if any of you viewers have questions for Waj, I think he said his mother pronounces it Wajahat. Is that right?
That was very good. You get a B+ for that.
B+, well, I'll take that. If you have any questions, you can ask them. Look here on the screen in the Facebook comments or send an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org. So this show is called Ask an Atheist, but today we have a question that we want to ask you. What do you think it will take for Americans to stop embracing Christian nationalism? And you can put your answer in the comments on Facebook, and we might read it on the air in a few minutes, assuming it's family friendly. And remember, FFRF is a 501c3 nonpartisan, non-political organization. So we do not and we cannot take sides in partisan elections and don't necessarily endorse any such views that might be expressed here.
All right. Well, Waj, in your book, Go Back to Where You Came From, which we'll talk more about in the second half of the show, you show what American society does to immigrants and how they're made to feel like outsiders in their own country. How did that experience in writing your book help prepare you to think about Christian nationalism and what the security threat it poses to America?
Yeah, it's the same problem. Look, it's white supremacy, but with the cross, right? And Christian nationalism cannot be discussed without understanding white supremacy. It's the foundation of it all. Specifically for those who are children of immigrants, for those who are people of color, for those who are not seen as white. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, this includes Irish Catholics, Italian Americans, Eastern European Jews, and let's not forget Benjamin Franklin really hated the Germans as well, right? So the invaders and rapists of the past were the Jews and the Italians and the Irish Catholics. It's the same story now being used against Muslims and Latinos and those who come from the shithole countries, right? Same story. It's not even a remake. It's like a reboot. It's like Gen Z loves their reboots, right? So it's like a new Scream and a new Halloween, like it never dies. And basically what happens is it's this perpetual feeling when you're this outsider that your country will turn on you on a dime. You have to love a country that doesn't love you back. You fight for a country that doesn't have your back. You're both us and them, a native and a foreigner, a citizen and a suspect. And your citizenship is conditional with an asterisk on it, and it will be revoked, right? Same thing happened to all the groups that I mentioned, right? no matter what you do, no matter how good you are, no matter how moderate you are, no matter how much you pay your taxes, and you're a good model minority, and you raise your kids well, and you go to a good school, just
Mhm.
like that overnight, if the country turns on you, if the majority turns on you, that's it. You're the scapegoat, you're the villain, you get hazed, and you get blamed for all the country's problems. Now, with Christian nationalism, we're now seeing this the revival, if you will, of Christian nationalism, thanks to MAGA, thanks to Trumpism, thanks to Marjorie Taylor Greene, where
Mhm.
now they're openly saying, without any subtlety whatsoever, there's no separation of church and state. Lauren Boebert said that. Marjorie Taylor Greene said that. Charlie Kirk, who leads the MAGA brown shirt movement, right, Turning Point USA, said that's not there. I mean, you just got to read the Constitution. You literally have to have like basic reading comprehension. It's there, but they're openly saying, no, this is nonsense. This is a Christian nation,
Mhm.
which completely goes against both the Constitution and the deliberate intention of the founders who put that there for a reason, knowing full well that, yes, even though it's white Christian men mostly, we want this country, we want to have religious freedoms as well. And so what they want is a country where their tribe is in power. White Christian men. But it's not just white Christian men, and I'll end on this. It's white Christian men who think exactly like them.
Mhm.
And if you don't think this affects you, right? So a lot of people are probably watching, especially if you're of the white persuasion. We love the whites. My favorite white is the moderate white. Welcome whites. Or if you're Christian, you think, oh, I'll be safe. Mike Pence is,
Mhm.
I think we would agree, perhaps the whitest, most Christian, most Republican man on earth. Okay.
Mhm.
Literally prostituted himself for Donald Trump, debased himself for years. At the end, it was Dan Quayle, I believe, and Justice Ludig, who you saw him at the January 6th hearing,
Right.
a very well renowned conservative justice who said, you have to do your duty. You
Mhm.
have to certify this election. Joe Biden won. And Mike Pence is like, fine, I guess I'll do it. And as a result, what happened, guys? They tried to kill him. If they try to kill Mike Pence, what are they going to do to these two white future fodder of hellfire and this brown Muslim guy? What are they going
Mhm.
to do to you as a white Christian or like semi Christian who kind of disagrees with Trump? It's a fascist movement cosplaying as Christians who want to create a white supremacist theocracy. And the rest of us, if we play along, we'll be lucky to rent a room.
Right. What do you say that one of it's been a lot of the Republican candidates now, especially for Congress, are now becoming much more diverse on that. Do you think that shields the MAGA movement from saying that they're white Christian nationalisms? Is it just kind of a smokescreen? What do you think about the fact that GOP candidates are getting more diverse?
That's a very good question. I was thinking about writing a piece on this called the unbrainwashed Manchurian candidates. And I'm glad Manchurian candidate is trending. I mean, it's trending for all the wrong reasons because Angela
Sure.
Lansbury, rest in peace, passed away. But one of her great roles was in this classic movie, Manchurian Candidate. For those of you who have not seen the movie, you must see it. The remake was pretty good. See the original. But it's about it was took place in the it was filmed in the 60s. Was talking about the communists who brainwashed these U.S. soldiers and create these assassins, right? And so the reason why I call it the unbrainwashed is they're not brainwashed, but they're the type of they're the people of color oftentimes have always been used as cultural validators for the
Hmm.
right wing. The Manchurian candidates, right? What I mean is like the people who give them a cover for their racism. I can't be racist. I'm standing next to Herschel Walker. I can't be racist. Look at Winsome Sears, the lieutenant governor. I love the Indians. I support Nikki Haley. And so what it does is it gives them a Candace Owens, a Dinesh D'Souza, a Larry Elders, right, to basically be the mouthpiece for all their talking points, and also to completely, if you will, wash away their racism and give them an exquisite cover for their very open racism and conspiracy theories. And the people of color who allow themselves to be used as these Manchurian candidates, they have their autonomy. Maybe they say it's like that Chris Rock, great Chris Rock bit, right? where he's trying to explain why women who are feminists still listen to like the most filthy rap musics. And then at the end of the day, the woman goes, he ain't talking about me, right? And so they think, oh, they're not talking about me. They're talking about the other ones. I'm the good minority. Or they're like, well, this is a good racket. I'll get paid. Or some of them, like Herschel Walker and others, believe it or not, they align around the Christian nationalism, right? For them, it's their Christian nationalist identity that trumps everything else, and the culture war supersedes everything else. Like, so that's how you get like an Alan West. That's how you get like a Larry Elder. That's how you get like a Herschel Walker. That's how you might even explain a Herman Cain. And so when it comes to white Christian nationalism, they're like, aha, we have the cultural validators. We have our Trojan horses. We have our Manchurian candidates. They will echo and parrot our talking points with the black and brown skin. And we get the cover to say, look, we're not racist. And then we get to peel off some black and brown folks, especially those who are religious, from the Latino community, from the Asian community, from the black community. We'll even get some Muslims around the LGBTQ issue. And that's how we'll run the tables and win the election. It's a very dangerous phenomenon, but it's nothing new.
Or maybe some Native Americans. You mentioned the word tribe a few minutes ago, and the name of your book is Go Back Where You Came From. And of course, we atheists hear that a lot. If you don't like America, go back where you came from. I'm an enrolled member of a Native American tribe, the Delaware tribe. We call ourselves the Lenni Lenape. And when the white Europeans came over to this continent, to our continent, with a gun in one hand and a Bible in the other hand, they were the outsiders. They were the original outsiders, and yet most white Christian nationalists today don't realize that they're descendants from immigrants themselves. If I'm supposed to go back where I came from, where am I supposed to go, Waj?
Your mother's womb, I guess. I'm supposed to go back to Fremont, California, where I was born. And I always tell people, okay, I would love to if you could subsidize my rent. It's hella expensive in California. And that's what's so interesting, right? It's like this hazing process in America, if you've noticed. And I mentioned that on purpose, right? The Germans were hated, then the Germans became mainstream. They became white. Then they beat up the Irish. The Irish were so hated in this country that there used to be signs that said no dogs, no blacks, no Irish, right? But then the Irish became mainstream and became white. Then the Italians came. They got hazed in the 20s. Eastern European Jews. The problem is for the rest of us, and I would include indigenous Americans, those are people of color. You know, African Americans have been here for 400 years, right? They've helped build this country, literally. Indigenous Americans, this is their country. And yet they're still told to go back because no matter how long they've been here, because they're not able to be absorbed into whiteness, we're the other, right? That's the test, right? So when everyone says assimilate, well, even when they try to assimilate, because let me tell you, folks, the replacement theory is now a mainstream conspiracy theory in America. The replacement theory is a white supremacist, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not saying this lightly. It came from the swamps of the neo-Nazis, the KKK, and white supremacists. It says that Jews are the head of an international cabal using black people, brown people, Muslims, and immigrants of color to weaken and replace white people and Western civilization, whatever that means. It means white Christian. That's what it means. And this white supremacist conspiracy theory has been mainstreamed by Fox, Tucker, and the right wing, and also mega churches, to the point now, ladies and gentlemen, where a third of Americans and a slight majority of Republicans believe it to be true. So they see the rest of us as invaders. And the way this relates to Christian nationalism is, for Christian nationalists, they believe that God has made America a special land and has made white Christian men the stewards of this land. And he has entrusted this land to white Christian men to purify this land from the original savages, the indigenous folks, and everyone else. And if they do their job right, and if they purify this land, and if they put the cross in this land, then they will establish the kingdom of what? Heaven. And then Jesus will return. And so for them, they have a celestial stamp of approval That's what's so dangerous. They believe, to quote the Blues Brothers, they're on a mission from God. And they have made Jesus into a mascot for their political ideology and their white supremacy. And the Jesus that all of us know, even if you're an atheist, people are like, that Jesus, he was onto some good things. Feed the poor, help the sick, be kind, talk against capitalism and unrepentant avarice and greed. I like that Jesus, even though I might be an atheist, right? That's what people might say. That Jesus ain't their Jesus. This is important. The Jesus of Christian nationalism is warrior Jesus. Let me repeat, warrior Jesus. What they specifically say is, we're not into that pansy Jesus. We don't turn the cheek. William Boykin, who used to be a freaking general in the United States of America, said, Jesus will return with an AR-15. That's their Jesus. That's their mindset. Warrior Jesus, commandment to go forth and purify the lands through violence if necessary, which explains, like you said, your people's history. It justifies the engines of war and colonization because I'm on a mission from God and I have to pacify and purify these heathens. And if they don't get pacified and purified, well, then they have to get smoten.
Yeah. And one of their favorite songs, of course, is Onward, Christian Soldiers. I think even the Klan used that song in some of their meetings. So, well, that's fascinating. I wanted to ask you, in your history, your personal history, did 9/11 and did the January 6th insurrection shape your views in any way?
All this is connected, right? So let's go to 9/11. People forget this. George W. Bush used the word crusade. Mm-hmm. He said, we're on a crusade. And if you remember, his European allies are like, for the love of God, please never use that word again, because that is still a triggering word, right? But he used the word crusade. Boykin at that time, the same man I mentioned, was, deployed, and he was using the word Christian soldiers. He was like proselytizing while in fatigues, right? And for many folks, it was this type of evangelical movement, right, to save these heathens, right? Everyone was complicit in this. Even Laura Bush said, we have to save these Afghan women from these men, right? And, there was a brilliant scholar who coined this term, justifying the engines of war, which oftentimes were done with, a cross, is we have to save brown women from brown men. Look at the war on terror. Look at the war in Iraq. Look at the war in Afghanistan. Save these women from these heathens, right? And then it kind of fueled and paved the way for this engines of war, this disastrous war that still burns, by the way, has left a legacy of pain and ruin and trauma. And, oh, by the way, we attacked the wrong countries. And by the way, democracy did not bloom. But that word crusade, immediately popped up. And George W. Bush used that word. And for much of his base, which was an evangelical Christian base that he courted, right? It was Reagan. Then Bush, especially the son, George W. Bush, doubled down on it, which then fed into the rise of what? The Tea Party and Trump, right? So a large part of this rise of Christian nationalism, as it fuels, like you said, the Christian war. You saw it with the war on terror, and I was a young man at that time. I was 21, a senior at UC Berkeley, undeclared, trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. And then I saw the two towers fall. I was in my pajamas. And right when they said that, Al-Qaeda might be responsible, I remember I had like this vision. And I'm like, yep, things are going to be pretty bad for Muslims and anyone who looks Muslim-y going forward. And I remember I was 20. There was no Fareed Zakaria. There was no Miss Marvel. There was no Kamala Harris, right? There was no representation. We were on our own. So for my generation, and anyone who's around 41 or 40 or 42, you guys remember, that 9/11 for us was like a major fork in the timeline. There was always a pre-9/11 and a post-9/11. It was like a defining moment. That and the 2008 recession that really effed us up in a big way. And for us, it was like I'm going to use an amazing pop cultural reference. It was an X-Men Danger Room simulation for the rest of our life, right? Like, because we were thrust in a leadership role. We had there was no workshops and no training and no one held our hands. I always joke that dark humor here, if Muslims knew 9/11 was going to happen, I wouldn't have joined the Muslim Student Association at UC Berkeley, ladies and gentlemen. I would have joined the Indian Student Association. I would have learned how to do Bhangra and learn how to spell and go on some hot dates. But F my life, I joined the Muslim Student Association and I was a student leader. And next thing you know, I'm asked to be an activist, a cultural ambassador of 1.7 billion people. And from that moment on, guys, talking about that hazing effect, that first question that you said, how it feels to be the other, overnight, I realized we were no longer the model minority. We were no longer, before it, white. No matter how much good you did, it wasn't enough. You, as the Muslim, or you who were Muslimi, was a perpetual suspect. And from that day on, even to now, Muslims have to apologize for violent actions done by violent people we've never met. And our loyalty and our patriotism is held as suspect. And every single thing that you hear Republicans say openly now against Muslims, I did the research on this also. If you look at my bio, if you replace Muslim with Irish Catholic and Jew, exactly what nativists have said against Jews and Catholics in the 19th century and the 20th century America. It's a reboot. But the difference I'll say is this, and this is what's really scary, guys, is in 2001, and George W. Bush was a terrible president. But even George W. Bush, if you remember, he came out. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Oh, I froze though. Okay, as long as you guys can hear me, my screen froze. But if you can hear me, that's fine. George W. Bush, he said the following. He came out, he gave a speech, and he said, Islam is not the enemy. You guys remember that?
Yes.
And he went to a mosque. The funny thing is now, if George W. Bush ran as a president in 2024 as a Republican, they would literally boo him because they would say he's a Muslim lover. And the difference is, even though now it's getting better and there's more Muslim representation, and you see a guy like me talking on your podcast, I grew up in this country. The worst thing I was called growing up was Apu, which I'm like, okay, or Gandhi. Now you have open Republican elected officials who can say the most bigoted, hateful things about Muslims and immigrants. And guys, there's no penalty. Just this week, Marjorie Taylor Greene stood in front of a crowd and literally recited the replacement theory word for word, and nobody's talking about it. Because what happens is once you normalize hate, it becomes mainstream and the Overton window shifts. And we have not even discussed it. And what we're discussing instead is John Fetterman, who recovered from a stroke. Did you know he had to use closed captioning? And I'm sitting there thinking, I wonder when these political journalists might find out that FDR was in a wheelchair. That's, or that Madison had epilepsy, or JFK was sick, or Reagan had a lot of dementia. But anyway, so that's the, I'm not trying to scare folks, but it's a scary time, ladies and gentlemen. And fascism and Christian nationalism is being mainstreamed. And I still believe people are not talking about it. And it blows my mind.
So when you think about people talking about it, what do you think holds Biden back from naming and calling out Christian nationalism?
Yeah, well, so Biden is an institutionalist for better or worse. Biden, as he said, he's been in the Senate for like 900 years. Biden, wants to be bipartisan. Biden, I still comes from that era where he thinks like, we'll get in the back room over the log fire cabin, we'll drink some rum, we'll tell bawdy jokes and we'll get a deal done. And I think slowly but surely he's realized that's not working. And when he even said semi-fascism, you saw how this country, and even many journalists just lost their mind. How dare he use the word semi-fascist to describe MAGA? And I and others said like he was almost there. He should call it fascist. And he did a smart move, which he had to. He didn't say the Republican Party, although I would have said the Republican Party because I say MAGA has unfortunately taken over the Republican Party. He gave a big olive branch to Republicans, right? Even in his speech later that he did in Maryland. And he says, I know not all Republicans are like this. It's a very smart diplomatic political move that he has to do. But even then, the Republican Party didn't take the olive branch. Like they doubled down and they said, no, this is who we are, right? They didn't even apologize for it. And I think the reason why, specifically, why Biden institutions and politicians will not call it Christian nationalism, if we were to be honest, is because we're dealing with white Christians. We're dealing with the mainstream. We're dealing with salt of the earth. We're dealing with average America, the heartland, right? Let me give you an example, guys. Imagine, let's take it back to January 6th, 2020. Instead of 1,000 mostly white, MAGA, Trump-supporting violent insurrectionists who took over the nation's capital, it did an insurrection that led to the deaths of 5 people, including 1 cop, and literally brought weapons to assassinate Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi. Instead of them being white MAGA Christians, there were many Christians, we could talk about that in a second. Suppose there were brown-skinned Muslims and black folks. Guys, what would happen? Tell me.
Little response.
No, tell me what would happen. Let's tease it out. What would happen?
Well, let's put it this way: when here in D.C. For the Black Lives Matter protests and also for the Women's March, the National Guard was out in force to protect against pink pussycat hats and whatnot, and there was a very heavy military presence for that. On January 6th, there was nothing. So obviously, if it were a very different audience, I have no doubt all measures of force would have been used.
Guys, we had the war on terror. All right, we attacked Iraq. We had mass surveillance of Muslims in this country. We had the NSEERS, which was literally a registry program that deported Muslims. People forget about that. We had congressional hearings on the unique threat of the radicalization of American Muslim communities, right? So many people were arrested. So many people were detained, right? There was just so much trauma, nonstop coverage, headlines, prosecutions. And yet, even though a report came out in February that I still don't know why people aren't talking about, that did the research and said that Christian nationalism was a major motivating factor in the January 6th violent insurrection, where there was Christian nationalist ideology and slogans and T-shirts and people. Doug Mastriano, a Christian nationalist, a Republican running for governor of Pennsylvania, guess where he was on January 6th? At the rally, right? And so how come no one talks about this growing threat? And the only person who really has talked about it is Congressman Jamie Raskin, one of the very few brave voices who has endured immense tragedy with the death of his son. But he was there along with his Republican and Democratic colleagues cowering for their lives. People forget that they had to be barricaded, ladies and gentlemen, because if those guys broke through, some of them would have died, folks. Like Mike Pence was this close to dying. People forget that. Look at the footage. And so Jamie Raskin, as a Jewish man, as a person who feels deeply because he knows his people's history of anti-Semitism in this country, and a person who worries deeply about national security, he's at the forefront right now with these January 6th hearings. He's been one of the few people who's come out and said, yo, we have to investigate this. But because it is white Christians, you are seeing Biden and everyone else hold their punches because they realize that right-wing and Republicans will then accuse them of being what? Anti-white and anti-Christian. And because Democrats are too afraid to make the case and to push back against this open national security threat, nothing's going to happen. I'll also say this when it comes to law enforcement. About over 10 years ago, the FBI did a memo that said white supremacy has infiltrated law enforcement.
Right.
It has done this again and again and again. I wrote a Daily Beast piece on this, right? This is nothing new, ladies and gentlemen. The Oath Keepers list came out. Proud Boys list came out, right? Guess who's around those lists? These are the 2 extremist groups whose leaders right now are being tried for seditious conspiracy against the United States of America because they participated in the violent coup and they're allies of Trump. A lot of ex-military, current and retired, wait for it, law enforcement officials. To quote Rage Against the Machine, some of those who work forces are the same who burn crosses. And going back to the KKK and the cross and the burning cross, a lot of those guys were what? Law enforcement. So this is one of those situations where I think Biden realizes, and this is what's so frustrating for the rest of us, the #1 domestic terror threat in America is white supremacist terrorism. No one talks about it. And the growing threat is Christian nationalism. No one talks about it because it's the preferred majority, and you don't want to upset the preferred majority. And I think they realize that the right wing will use it politically against them, and so the rest of us just suffer.
So Waj, besides Raskin, is also Jeremy Huffman. Jared Huffman of California, and a number of the members of the Free Thought Caucus who are also naming Christian nationalism. And that report that you referred to, it came out in February, was a report that FFRF, our group,
Yes.
co-authored with the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty to expose that. We only have about a minute left here before we go to questions, but can you very briefly summarize this Flight 93 memo and why it's influential?
Yeah. Oh, so sorry. You guys got me excited, and I was enjoying the conversation. And pardon me for my long old man rants. That's what happens after you turn 40. So apologies to you guys, and apologies.
No, it's wonderful.
To the
it's
audience.
Great. This is great.
The Flight 93 memo is a very dangerous memo. There you go. You have it up there. I'm so happy. It was written by this gentleman, Michael Anton, who then later worked in the Trump, I think, National Security Council. And specifically, he warned right before the election that this election for Republicans is the Flight 93 election. Now, Flight 93, for those of you who remember, was one of the hijacked airplanes. And then the crew said, let's charge the cockpit. And so even though they were going to go down, they were going to go down with a fight, right? They're going to try their best. The reason why this is so terrifying is it gives you the mindset of the right-wing party and the MAGA movement. This is it. It's all or nothing. It's an absolutist mindset, zero sum. It's either us or them, and we have to charge the cockpit and die if necessary to save our country. It's with that mindset, ladies and gentlemen, that they are now fueling this movement, that the rest of us are an enemy, a deep state, groomers, part of an international cabal that will replace them and take over their children. And in order to keep their civilization and their children alive, they have to use violence if necessary. They are not the villains. They are the victims, and they have to charge the cockpit. They have to charge the cockpit or die trying. That's the mindset that we're in. A zero-sum absolutist game. Very dangerous.
Right. So, and if you have questions for Waj, you can ask them in the Facebook comments or send an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org. Be sure to answer our audience question for the day. What do you think it will take for Americans to stop embracing Christian nationalism? And a lot of some of your writings recently on Daily Beast have focused on Ginny Thomas and her role in promulgating the big lie. So when the January 6th committee reconvenes tomorrow, Ginny Thomas is expected to be highlighted. What do you think what will you be paying attention to?
Oh, man, I have tried my best to, if you see my tweets and my articles, I've been saying this for months. I've said, investigate Ginny Thomas, investigate Ginny Thomas, investigate Ginny Thomas. I mean, for those of you guys don't know, Ginny Thomas is the wife of Clarence Thomas. They refer to each other over and over and over again as best friends, okay? Ginny Thomas, we have her texts, we have her emails, where she literally, and I'm using the word literally as it's meant to be used, texted Mark Meadows, begging him to not surrender, to keep up the fight. She quoted QAnon conspiracies. QAnon is a national domestic terror threat, ladies and gentlemen, right? She sent emails begging Republican lawmakers, both in Arizona and Wisconsin, right, to go along with the coup. She hosted John Eastman, the right-wing attorney who came up with the coup memo, after the election. She is all in. And in her closed-door interview, the chairman, Benny Thompson, said that she believes the election is stolen. Now, how come she is not investigated when we have her texts? She seems to be utterly complicit in it, and she's not like a marginal figure. She's the wife of Clarence Thomas, and in her own right, she's a major, I would say, mother, if you will, of the conservative right-wing movement, especially when it comes to activists and fundraising. And finally, I'll say this, is Justice Thomas, you show his complicity because in a rare bipartisan move, if you will, if I can call the Supreme Court, it's partisan, right? 8-1, they did a ruling that said that Donald Trump has to hand over documents related to January 6th. Guess who was that one no vote?
I wonder.
Justice Thomas.
I wonder who.
And I wonder why. I wonder why he didn't want those documents out. And you're sitting, and I'm like sitting here thinking to myself, yo, imagine if Republicans were in power. Do you think they'd sit there and be like, well, we can't go after spouses of Supreme Court justice? Are you kidding me? So, missed opportunity. as far as the January 6th hearing, I feel like they should have made it prime time. I feel like they should have gone their act together and done two. I feel like Americans care about it, but I want them to make a compelling narrative. I want them to show it was not just Donald Trump, but an absolute orchestrated MAGA effort that was Trump, elected officials, these grassroots groups, funders, and donors, and that it's still ongoing. The threat is still ongoing. The coup hasn't ended. I want them to make that case to the people, especially as we're heading towards a very historic election, which let's see if we have a democracy, man. Let's see.
Well, maybe some of the committee members are watching this show and they'll listen to your advice, Waj. We're really almost out of time here, and we do want to give a chance for some of the audience to ask some questions and respond to our question if you have a response to our question. We do have a question from a viewer named John K. And John is asking, is there a limit to the reach of Christian nationalism? In other words, could a majority of people in this country become Christian nationalists, or is it just a minority? Are there built-in barriers to that majority actually happening?
John K., I wish you were right, but let's just look at what's happening right now. You have a minority in the Supreme Court that has the majority. You have a 50-50 Senate, but it's not 50-50 because the 50 Republicans represent 44 million less Americans. Mm-hmm. You have Republican presidents, all except I think one of George W. Bush's terms, right, in our lifetime, that all lost what? The popular vote. You don't need the majority. The way our system is set up, unfortunately, is that it benefits a radicalized minority. It's a malapportioned Senate because of the Electoral College. You get the president, and look at these guys. They were able to look at Trump, a guy who didn't win the majority, was able to put three Supreme Court justices. I would say two of them are stolen. And so you don't need the majority. You just need a committed, zealous minority. This is what I tell people. Give me a radical, zealous minority that wakes up every day with a cause and purpose over a flabby, moderate majority, because that radicalized minority will cut through us as if we were butter. And that's what you're seeing right now. And they know it, right? So look at Leonard Leo, a huge news that I knew would just like fall from the wayside. Leonard Leo is this conservative kingmaker. You can trace the radicalization of the courts to Leonard Leo. It's been his like lifelong cause. He courts right-wing billionaire money, and then he cedes it to like the Federalist Society, and then it's an incubator hub for like these right-wing justices, and voila. That's how you have all these like Supreme Court justices, federal justices, and like, district court justices who are just basically, right-wing cultists, right? He just got $1.3 billion from a right-wing billionaire, which means it will fuel his empire for the next 10, 15 years. You don't need the majority. They know they don't need the majority. They just need to get in power, and then the guardrails don't matter, because guardrails only matter if the guardians of those guardrails have ethics and are complying by rules. But if those guardians say, I'm not going to do it, a large part of democracy, honestly, is us trusting people to do the right thing. Really, if you think about it, like we have faith and hope that the people that we entrust to guard the guardrails will do their job. What happens if those people say, F you, I'm not going to do it? And voila, there you go.
Well, thank you, Waj, for those optimistic words, I guess, those positive words. We maybe would have you come back to ask you what we should do about this, but we're out of time today. But thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, you know what? I never want to end on a negative note. Give me 10 seconds. Listen, it ain't over until it's over. There is something powerful about the majority, but the majority has to organize and flex. And especially when it comes to school boards, once we've showed up in the past year, wherever these right-wing MAGA folks come with the numbers, we win, guys. Locally, we win. School boards, medical boards, city councils, and there is an election coming up. We have to vote. You have to vote. So flex. Never give up, Flex. We have the numbers, but we have to organize.
There you go. So the solution is political. The solution is the voting box. Well, thank you again. So that ends our Ask an Atheist show for this week. We also have a broadcast TV show that airs in many markets around the country. It's called Free Thought Matters. And our guest this week is Catherine Stewart. She's the author. It's a book about Christian nationalism. She's the author of The Power Worshippers. Here's a preview of that show. You're one of the early journalists and authors who was noticing this thing called Christian nationalism, like warning about the dangers of Christian nationalism. You were not wrong, were you?
You know, I've been following this movement for 14 years, and one thing that I've learned is that we really need to listen to the movement leaders. They've been telling us for a long time that they want to tear down the separation of church and state. They're taking aim at many of our individual rights that many of us hold so dear. They reject the principles of pluralism and equality that represent the best of the American promise. They want to take back our schools and bring our nation back to a sort of mythical time that never was. But sometimes it's very difficult to actually hear what they're saying. I think a lot of times people reframe what they're hearing in order to make themselves more comfortable with it. But they've been very clear. They're not hiding. It's just that we're not listening.
So also dealing with Christian nationalism this week on Free Thought Radio. You can find that at ffrf.org/radio. Annie Laurie and I will be speaking with Minnesota State Representative Mike Freeberg. He's the founder of the new Secular Government Caucus in that state, which was formed to resist Christian nationalism and to defend church-state separation. That new Secular Caucus starts out with 24 members.
And if you want more information about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, check out our website at ffrf.org. And if you're already a member, thank you. If not, please join us. See you next time on FFRF's Ask an Atheist.